The Australian Financial Review.
A healthy dose of competition is what keeps this CEO striving for more.
Competitiveness is a wonderful thing if you are bringing everybody with you. The world is big, there's enough growth for everyone. You know, you're never done. If you think you're done, you're dead and you should move on because there's always something that you can improve and get better at, and I love that.
Welcome to 15 Minutes with the Boss, a podcast about success, failure, and the lessons learnt along the way. I'm your host, Sally Patton, and my guest today is Anubha Sahasrabuddhe, the Chief Executive of Lion in Australia and New Zealand. The brewing giant is behind some of Australia's most iconic beer brands, including 4X, Stone & Wood, Tooheys and Hahn. So before we start, Anubha, I have to ask, are you a beer lover and what's your favourite brand?
Well, Sally, it's wonderful to be here. And let me say that, well, you're asking me to pick amongst my favourite children. So, yeah, look, I am a recent convert to beer in the 5 years I've been at Lion. And I have to say right now, I am thoroughly enjoying the Stone & Wood Radler, which is extending my sense of summer because it's refreshing and delicious.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. We've only got 15 minutes. I'm going to start the clock right now. First up, tell me about your morning routine. What time do you get up? What happens?
So I am up and at 'em at 4:30 every morning. I then drag my husband out of bed and we head to the gym to train together. So it's a wonderful way to start the day. No one can get you, and we find that a great way to connect in an otherwise hectic day.
And do you do the breakfast thing?
Hey, I do the breakfast thing, but it is a protein smoothie. It's an on-the-go breakfast thing. So when we get back from the gym, we have a coffee together on the deck, which is a lovely way before the insanity of a day begins. And then it's the protein smoothie and the fuel to go out the door and cracking into the day.
And you're ready. Okay, my next question is about your career. Was there a pivotal moment in your career, a project you worked on, say a promotion that you were given that changed the trajectory of what you were doing?
Yeah, look, it is a great question. And when I think about everything over the last 25 years, it has to be when I was tapped to go to China with a brief that said, you have to make Chinese youth fall in love with Coca-Cola and beat Pepsi while you're at it. And the backdrop to that was the Beijing Olympics were coming.
So where were you working at the time and who for?
So I was working for the Coca-Cola company. Coca-Cola was actually my first job. I had studied law, but then decided I didn't want to do that. So I joined the Coca-Cola company. I had spent about 6 years across Australia and New Zealand, and I had been sent from the Antipodes here to Hong Kong, working across the Asia-Pacific region. And then this amazing challenge of mainland China came up, and from there I moved from Hong Kong to Shanghai and took on that challenge.
And did you accept that challenge immediately, or did you have to think about it for a long time? How did that work?
Didn't think for a moment. I thought the idea of having a opportunity like China's coming out party, because it was much more than the Coca-Cola part of it. China was having a moment, and the Beijing Olympics was an absolute point in time in Chinese history. So to be a tiny part of that and to have a front row seat to what was happening in that country at that point in time, extraordinary.
So how did you go about beating Pepsi in China?
So I think the key learning from that time was, how do you actually create a deep cultural connection with Chinese youth? It wasn't about pushing Americana onto them. It was rather understanding what was the cultural catalyst for them. And that was all around national pride. And that was all about them taking their part in the world stage, and how could Coca-Cola be an enabler to that.
So you associated drinking Coca-Cola with national pride?
Absolutely. And we had a very, very extensive program of supporting Chinese athletes, because the entire framework of the Olympics was showcasing the best of Chinese talent. And there's nothing that made Chinese youth feel prouder or more connected than seeing their athletes and their culture on full display. So very powerful and humbling at the same time.
Now, Anubha, tell me, what is the best piece of career advice you've ever received?
Well, in a career you get a lot, but the one that stands out for me is I had a South African president in my early days at Coke, and he basically said, go big or go home. And I think what he meant, and certainly what I took out of that is, you know what, you leave nothing on the table. You absolutely want to die trying because you don't want to die wondering. And I have very much sort of adopted that philosophy or advice in the personal decisions that I make as much as what's right for the organisations that I'm leading. So it's one that has stuck for 20 years.
That's interesting. So does that mean that you've become a bit of a risk taker? Because in order to get ahead, you need to take some sort of risk.
Yeah, there's a great quote, fortune favours the brave. And I do believe that. I think with the level of complexity and competitiveness in the world, I think organisations have to have real clarity and conviction around what they want to stand for and then stand by that. And that means putting yourself on the line or putting the organisation on the line to be in service of that ambition. Failure is going to happen. So this is not about avoiding failure, but I'm a strong believer that you need to be absolutely convinced in your convictions and go for them.
So can you give me an example of how you have taken that advice, say, into Lion with one of your brands? Is there something that you have done which is go big or go home?
When I arrived at Lion about 5 years ago, one of our brands, Han, had been sidelined. It hadn't been invested in for a very long time. And what we saw in the world was consumers and drinkers wanting better for you, low carb, zero carb propositions. And we dusted off this brand that had been sort of neglected and really supercharged it with investment, with communication, with innovation. And 5 years on from that, it's amongst the fastest growing brands in Australia in a category that, is challenged. So I think that's a great example of saying, right, we're going to go big or go home on this brand because we strongly believe it is the right brand for this moment in time and to bring in the next generation of drinkers.
And did that seem like a really risky thing to do at the time?
I think it did for the board at the time because no one had ever talked about it. So you have a strategy at a point in time, but I think the wrong thing to do is think that strategies are static. So it is all about understanding consumer sentiment and market opportunity and being prepared to back yourself and the organisation behind that. So absolutely we need to do the right convincing of the stakeholders involved, but I'm a big believer as well is what's the alternative? So when you're faced with declining consumption and a pretty challenged market, you have to be willing to take risks in order to change the trajectory. And Han's a great example of that.
Anubha, stay right where you are. We are going to take a short break, and when we come back, you pick the questions. I'll see you soon. Welcome back to 15 Minutes with the Boss. I'm here with Anubha Sahasrabuddhe, the Chief Executive of Lion in Australia and New Zealand. Now, Anubha, in front of you is a somewhat scruffy cardboard box with about 20 random questions inside. For this next section, I'm going to ask you to pick out a question one by one. Are you ready to get started?
I am so ready, Sally.
Tell me about a time when you failed at something. What happened? How did you recover? And what did you learn?
Look, I'm a strong believer that it's not about a single failure. I've got an entire career full of failures, and I think my biggest learning around failures is about the fact that they're not fatal. So I don't believe failure is fatal. I actually think it's vital to how you progress and grow individually and how a company gets better. So I know I'm probably not perfectly answering your question, but I've had so many from product failures. One of the ones that comes to mind specifically would be, again, in China, where the rate and pace of innovation expectation is just so high. And this is now going back about 15 years, but the single most popular drink in China amongst Chinese people is tea. And the single biggest soft drink at the time was Sprite, which was one of Coke's. And we put them together. And we thought that would be refreshing and delicious for Chinese people. We put a whole lot of money into it, go big or go home. And it didn't work. And the learning from that was it was well ahead of its time, because now if you actually go to China or many parts of the world, you will see those combinations everywhere. But 15 years ago, China wasn't ready for that type of product innovation. And so we learnt, we moved on, and we found new ways to grow.
So I've heard of similar examples actually in other industries where a product is launched and it's just a bit too far ahead of its time. What is the secret to getting the timing right? How do you know when the timing is right?
You know what? No one has a crystal ball on perfect timing. You do the best you can with the knowledge and research you have. I will say that the tech industry, I think, has been incredibly instructive for consumer goods companies like my own to understand the power of test and learn. So this is, I think, a critical learning that most consumer goods companies have now taken forward from 15 years ago to say, do these small test markets understand the signals in the real world versus just the conceptual research that used to define product innovation. So I think that's been a really great step forward in how you can de-risk before you scale things that you believe in are right for consumers.
So if you were launching that tea/Sprite product today, rather than go for a big launch, which is what I assume you did,
We did.
You would go for a smaller launch in a smaller market and just test it out.
Absolutely. You would pick a province or you would pick a customer, and you'd basically set up the conditions to really understand how real consumers are responding to that, what the pain points are, and then you can iterate. That's the beauty of a test and learn mindset.
Now, Anubha, what is a piece of advice you would give your younger self?
The piece of advice I would give my younger self is, why are you in such a rush? I would say I am a fast-paced person. I think back then I was even faster and in a giant hurry to do everything and be everywhere, to the point I know when I had my first daughter, I didn't take maternity leave and I took her with me to work because I was in the middle of the launch of a new product, and I stuck her under the table. And that was great. That was very unusual in 2003. But I would now say that I could have taken 3 months, I could have taken 6 months, and, you know, everything would have been fine. But at that point in time, I really didn't have the awareness or the understanding that actually everything would be fine if I stepped away and focused on the thing that mattered the most at the time.
So do you think that came from when you were at high school or university, that desire to really get ahead?
I think I've always been competitive. I love sports. Sports is my frame of reference for leadership and excellence, and I'm infinitely inspired by the way athletes and coaches approach performance. And yeah, I had a competitive family. I think my dad's competitive, my brother's competitive. And so keeping up with the family sort of instilled, I would say, a healthy competition to kind of constantly say, how can you be better? And what do you need to do in order to do that? And I think that has served me well because, you know, you're never done. If you think you're done, you're dead and you should move on, because there's always something that you can improve and get better at. And I love that.
So do you think you are as competitive now as you ever have been?
I think I am, but I'm a lot more conscious of how I manage that competitiveness. And I think competitiveness is a wonderful thing if you are bringing everybody with you, especially when you're leading large organisations. So there's a healthy form of competition. I want every brand in my organisation to have a healthy competition so everything rises. I don't want to have dysfunctionality and unhealthy competition where there is a belief that it's a zero-sum game. The world is big, there's enough growth for everyone, and so for me it's really, really important to contextualise competition, and so I think I'm a lot more aware of how to make a positive impact with that competitiveness.
But does that mean that you only hire really competitive people who want the same outcome as you?
No, that's not the case. I am very much, through my learnings of people and teams and how you have high-performing teams, is you need to have an absolute range of styles and perspectives, because imagine if you had a whole team of me. So I don't think so. So I think it's really, really important, and I am so, I always say, really privileged to have the executive I have around me, because how different they are in style, in experience, in background is what makes us a stronger organisation. So that is why in any hiring, having that diverse perspective through the interview process ensures that you're checking yourself for your own biases in terms of that. So it's something I have learnt, over many decades of honing how to pick the right teams around you.
That is a great approach to hiring. Now, Anubha, what is your pet hate in the office?
My pet hate in the office. Can I have more than one?
You can.
Okay. First, I hate late. I cannot stand people that are late.
To meetings or other things?
To meetings, to anything. I think it's a sign of respect. And if you're going to be late, you need to let people know, and it doesn't matter where you are in the organisation. It's a respect thing, so that's a pet peeve. Second one is dirty kitchens. What is wrong with people? It is, I'm sure they wouldn't do that at home, or maybe they do, but when you are sharing a common space, and we have wonderful open plan offices, everyone's together, seriously, do better. It is not nice to come to a sink full of filthy dishes when we have dishwashers and all the amenities that make it very, very simple to clean up after yourself.
I quite agree. Actually, and just on that, do you have a fridge full of beer at work?
We have not just a fridge full of beer, we have a bar. So our reception is a wonderful bar, and people can come after work. On Thursday nights we have bar nights, and we have a loneliness epidemic, so to have people come together and have a drink after work is a wonderful thing to have right there in the office.
And I guess you've got non-alcoholic and low-alcoholic options.
And we really do. And I think choice is such an important thing for people to understand. I think there's a lot of misconceptions when you work within the alcohol industry, but responsibility, moderation and choice is at the heart of it. Australians have fundamentally changed the way they drink. And so you come to the bar and you can have a 0 4 pillars, or you can have a 0 beer. So it's very much about that occasion and what's right for you in that occasion. And I think that's just a great thing when you think about how can you make the category more inclusive for people, is offer choice.
On that note, our 15 minutes is up. Thank you so much. I've now got one last question which we ask all our guests, and that is, if you weren't doing your current job, what would you be doing?
One of my many passions, and certainly at school and everything, is ancient history, and I wanted to be an archaeologist. So I would be an archaeologist. I'd be on a dig somewhere like Indiana Jones, and that's what I think I'd like to be doing.
Any particular period in history that you're interested in?
I love ancient Egypt, so that is one of my favourites, and it's on my bucket list so that I can live out that little dream.
Well, I wish you all the best in your new life as an archaeologist. And thank you, Anubha, so much for allowing us to spend 15 minutes with the boss. It's been fantastic.
Thank you, Sally.
And thank you to everyone for listening. If you like the podcast and you want to hear more, consider sharing the podcast or writing a review, as it helps us to reach more people. And follow us wherever you get your podcasts. At the Financial Review, we investigate the big stories about markets, business and power. For more, go to afr.com, and you can subscribe to the Financial Review, the daily habit of successful people, at afr.com/subscribe. This podcast was hosted by me, Sally Patton, produced and edited by Iona Rennie. Head of audio is Alex Gow, and our executive producer is Fiona Buffini. See you next week.
The Australian Financial Review.